Hello and welcome to our webinar for this month, the month of March. My name is Craig Cole. I'm the Senior Technical Education Specialist here at Mozy, and today we'll be discussing MozyPro for servers. I just wanted to cover a couple of things before we get started. Number one, we focus on training people on really the basics of how MozyPro works. We get a lot of questions on that are user education type questions. I need to know how to do this. I need to know how to back up certain things or to exclude certain things from being backed up. And we're trying to give you a basis of knowledge so that when questions come up, you have at least some context for how to figure out what's broken and work through it quickly and efficiently yourself. Of course, we are always here in the case where you can't figure it out or you need some extra support. So let's continue with our discussion. Today we're going to be talking about MozyPro in a server environment. MozyPro is not designed just for your desktops and your laptops. It can, using a server license, be used to back up some of the most common Windows Server software packages, such as Microsoft Exchange or SQL Server or other items of interest. So today we're going to focus on that, as well as backing up network shares on other servers or network attached storage devices, or NAS devices as they're called. So hopefully this will be of value beyond your standard, backing up Word documents and such, things that people are copying up to a server and saving there, or are being written from a server to a disk and being stored. So before we get too in depth here, we do need to do a little bit of definition here. There are two types of licenses available to MozyPro customers. There's a standard desktop license, which you would use for a laptop or just a workstation. And it's designed for backing up Office documents and pictures and media files and such that might be important to your business or important or work files for your employees. Desktop license, however, will not install on a server operating system. As part of the install routine, it looks at what operating system you're installing it on and will act accordingly. Now, this also needs to be, you just need to keep that in perspective. It does need to be installed. A desktop license is specific to a desktop operating system, Windows 7, Windows Vista, Windows XP. However, the reverse is not true. You can install a server license, which is designed for server operating systems, to run on. It can run on a desktop or a laptop computer just fine. You do get an additional set of features that come with that as well. It is designed for backing up network shares or network applications. MozyPro can back up various applications that are used most frequently, even in the small business environment. As an example, such as Microsoft Exchange for handling your mail or email in your office, or Active Directory, or SQL Server, or the sysvol on the server, or you can do your registry. You can do certain other things. So there are extended functions beyond the basic Office documents, music files, media files of some kind that you need to back up, AutoCAD documents and so forth, that you can use MozyPro to back up. So in order to use those functions of MozyPro, we need to use a Microsoft component that's built into every operating system from Windows XP on. So notice I'm excluding Windows 2000. There are some of our MozyPro customers who are using Windows 2000 still. Microsoft Windows 2000 does not have the capability to use Microsoft Volume Shadow Copy Service, or VSS as it's called for short. And so in order to back up these applications like Microsoft Exchange or the registry, you have to use the VSS subsystem, and it's required to be on your machine and functioning properly in order for these advanced backup functions to properly work. MozyPro, in order to take advantage of VSS, has to be installed on the machine where the application is running, where these files are stored. As an example, you cannot install MozyPro on server 1 and have it back up server 2 that has Microsoft Exchange on it, because it requires the VSS subsystem, and VSS does not work on network shares. That's a fine distinction, but you do need to keep that in mind when working with some of these advanced items. Now, VSS is a Microsoft product. It is not a Mozy product. So when you have problems with VSS, it's a problem with your operating system. It is not a problem with Mozy. Now, there's a problem here. There's a little bit of a catch-22 for us, because in order for our product to work, VSS has to function. And we want our product to work for you. We want it to function for you. And we'll even, in most minor cases, help you figure out what's broken. But keep in mind that it is a Microsoft problem, and you need to get that VSS subsystem functioning properly before you expect Mozy to fix your backup issues. Like I said, we are aware that we're dependent on it, and as a result, if you search in our knowledge base at support.mozy.com and look in the knowledge base there, you will find several articles or informational pieces that will tell you how to troubleshoot some of the VSS subsystems out there, and how to get them working, the VSS errors that occur out there. So keep in mind, again, if you call support and you have a VSS issue, in a lot of cases we will help you, but it's not our product, and we can't always resolve those issues because it's not something that, although we work with it, it's not something that we wrote, so we don't have control over it, and there are limits to what we can do. All right, let's continue on. So VSS has to be running in order to do some of these advanced backup functions that are required for backing up things like Microsoft Exchange or a SQL Server, and so forth. So now this gets a little more complex, because within MozyPro there is a set of functions called VSS backup sets. These VSS backup sets are sets that are designed to back up files that are open. So let's back up and talk a little bit more about VSS, or the volume shadow copy service. Again, Microsoft product, but VSS allows for the backup of files that are open or being touched by another application. So as an example, if you've ever tried to copy a file from a location, let's say a Word document, and you're editing the Word document at the same time, you're trying to move that file, it'll pop up and give you a permissions error or tell you that something else is using that. And VSS allows for modification of files even if something else is trying to do something with it. So it gives us a little bit of additional power when manipulating files. So inside of MozyPro, if you look at the backup sets section, you'll see that there are several backup sets defined for using VSS. And in brackets, as you see in the middle of the slide, it says VSS right next to it, telling you, again, that it's using the volume shadow copy service in order to provide that function. Now, there's a danger here. With these VSS backup sets, especially when dealing with like Microsoft Exchange, they're fairly complex. They're rule sets that back up all of the important files that are required for those applications to be able to run if you need to go back in time and grab an older version of that data. What that means, though, is that if you go into that VSS backup set and you make modifications to what it's backing up, you can break it. It would be kind of like opening up the hood of a car getting a cherry picker, taking the engine out, taking apart the engine, putting the engine back together, putting it back in the car, and having a bunch of pieces left over, and expecting the car to run as well or better than it did when you took the engine out. So you have to be very careful and not modify the VSS backup sets. Not terribly hard to do, but just keep in mind that that is a danger, that if you do modify the VSS backup sets, you could be damaging the subsystem, excuse me, the VSS backup sets, and by definition, you may be able to back up the data, but putting it back into the system and getting it to work again may not be possible. On top of backup sets, using VSS backup sets, and we're going to do a demonstration, we're going to talk about those VSS backup sets a little bit more. A lot of times that people will want to exclude data from being backed up using what are called exclusionary backup sets to create an exception that says, don't allow my employees, when they copy their entire music collection up to my server, don't back up that 23 gigs of data. I don't want that. So you can prevent people from, say, plugging in their phone, copying all the data off, and backing it up with Mozy for you. Because you do pay for data by the amount of quota you use or amount of space that you use. So people use exclusionary backup sets to prevent that kind of thing from happening. You could also do that for movies and so forth, or any type of file that might be large or take up a great deal of space that you want to prevent from being backed up with MozyPro. We're going to talk about and even demonstrate the exclusionary backup set. In order for the exclusionary backup sets to work, you have to enable an advanced function in the MozyPro settings. If you go into the MozyPro settings and go to the Option tab, there's an Advanced sub-tab. If you click on that, there's a labeled item that Show Advanced Backup Set Features, and that has to be checked in order for exclusionary rules to be created. Again, we will be providing a demonstration on this in just a few minutes. We can also use MozyPro using a server license. We can back up network shares. So we can back up items that are stored on remote devices. So a network attached storage or just a server of some kind that's sharing data. To add a network share, it's pretty simple. You open MozyPro, you go to the File System tab and right-click in the left-hand pane and select Add Network Share, which is right there, easy to select. Then you put in the path for the share and whatever credentials you're going to use when accessing that share, and click OK. And it saves it, and then you have that share enabled. Then you can go in and select files on that share as well. Again, we're going to give a bit of a demonstration on the basics of this in just a few minutes. So, first of all, let's look at what we're going to demonstrate today. I like to keep most of these webinars focused on the demonstration side, so we give just a quick song and dance to give you context, and then we will move into this demonstration phase where we will look at VSS backup sets. We're going to look at the exclusionary backup set, and then network shares. At the end of this demonstration, we are also changing our format just slightly today. We're going to include a question and answer section so that you can submit some questions. We'll be glad to take a few of those and answer questions you may have about either my presentation or any other questions that have arisen because of the topic today. All right, so one moment while I just jump out here. Let's start with just the VSS backup set. I'm going to open up, I've got my MozyPro settings right here on my particular machine. Now, I'm going to look at the VSS backup sets. Now, I've gone into and enabled something in my options so that I can see all of the configured backup sets. If you wanted to do that, you could go into Options and Advanced, and there's a Show All Pre-Configured Backup Sets. It's the fourth item down. When you do that, it makes it so all of the available pre-configured backup sets show up here. All right. Now, the ones that I'm interested in are these ones that say VSS on them. Right in front. You see that? VSS? The volume shadow copy system or service is engaged to provide this type of backup. You'll notice that in this case I have backed up my system registry. Now the system registry is something that is always open. It's always being accessed and being worked with as part of a Microsoft operating system. What does this mean? This means that these backup sets, when they are run, contact VSS in order to go and touch these files that are open and grab a copy of them, even though they're being written to or even being worked with by another application. If you have, as an example, now I don't have this installed on a server operating system. This is just Windows 7 64-bit. But if I had this installed on a server that had, say, Microsoft Exchange installed, it would display with that VSS precursor, Microsoft Exchange as a backup set. And it would be pre-configured to grab all of the important data, the databases, and the configuration files that go with restoring a Microsoft Exchange environment in the case of some sort of disaster or breakage. Okay, so that's VSS backup sets. They're fairly obvious, and based on what you have installed, you will see VSS backup sets appear for those items that apply to you. Backup sets that apply to things that you have installed in particular. All right, let's go on to the next section. So first we had the VSS backup sets. Our next item is the exclusionary backup sets rule. So I'm going to go ahead and add an exclusionary rule to our backup set. So in this case, I want to prevent. I'm going to right-click in this pane. I'm going to add backup set. Now, first of all, a backup set has to have three things. It has to have a name. So it has to have a name. It has to have a location where this backup set is in effect. In this case, I'm going to say in this particular folder, okay, because I know there's some music in there. And then it has to have a rule. Now, you'll notice that right now, I don't have any way to exclude the music. Now, don't confuse this exclude rule with the exclusionary backup set function. They're two different things. I'll explain in just a moment. Before I can actually complete this, I need to cancel out, and I need to go turn on the ability to show advanced backup set features in that Options Advanced tab. Now that I've got it enabled, if I go back to backup sets and right click, again, we're going to exclude music. Now notice this right up at the top. Let's first of all, let me go back and add this path. We're going to not back up that. Files matching this set will be excluded from the final backup set. Okay. This means that anything that matches any of the rules down here that are including things will be excluded from being backed up ever. So, let's say this were on a server, and I didn't want to back up any files of file type MP3. All right, now I want to point out we have an exclude. It says excluded up here, but it says include here. This is a tricky piece of logic, and I want to explain it real quickly. If I were to, let's say, clean out my garage, as part of cleaning out my garage, I get two boxes. One is a trash box, and one is a keep box. So as I'm going through my garage, I sort out my things, and I fill the box up with things that I want to throw out. So I include items in my trash bin before I throw them out. In other words, I have to put them in the box before I throw them out. I have to include them before I exclude them from being backed up. The same rule applies here. Despite creating an exclude music rule, I have to include items that match for this rule, so I have to tell it what to look for first. And then when I select this checkbox that says files matching this set will be excluded from the final backup set, when I select that, those items will be kept from being backed up. All right, does that make sense? It's a fairly complex idea, and it takes some people, including some of our techs out on the floor, our agents here, as they have to cope with that strange logic where you have to include it in the rule before you can tell it not to be backed up. All right, so I created a rule that says include file type MP3, and I'm telling it, even though it's included in this rule, I don't want you to back up anything that fits this rule. And that's how excluded rules work. So I created that, and now, if you look, down at the bottom I have an exclude rule. And if you select it, you'll notice that there's a whole bunch of music that is being excluded from being backed up. Okay, so it says exclude music, it matches this rule, and it's showing me what that is. Again, I can go in here and edit the backup set by right-clicking on the rule and make changes as I need to. Right, so these files on the right match the rule here, but since it's flagged as an excluded rule or exclusionary rule, it will prevent those files from being backed up. Again, a lot of people like that as part of their features now, so that they can prevent people from backing up personal data when they come into work. This is non-exclusive to servers, but it plays a fairly important part in making sure you're only backing up data that applies to your business, not personal data. You can also go into the admin console and create an exclusionary rule that applies to all of your employees if you want to, so that they can't back up their desktops with personal data like this as well. Be careful that you aren't too strict and lose business data as well. Just something to keep in mind. All right, now that's 2 of the 3 topics. Our last topic is network shares. The network share is, again, fairly simple. All we have to do is tell MozyPro where the server is that we want to connect to, the path that we want it to back up or to connect to, and the instructions, the username and password for logging in to that server. Now, doing so does not guarantee that the data in that spot is going to be backed up. All it says is this is how to connect to that server. You then have to use the File System tab to select those files that you want to back up. I'm only going to demonstrate how to put in the information. I'm not going to actually connect and select files for backup, but I just wanted to show you how this works. If you click on the File System tab, you can right-click in it and add Network Share on the left-hand pane there. And the window pops up that asks you for the share, and it asks for what's called a UNC path. A UNC path is simply the server name using these fancy backslashes as delimiters or ways to separate what parts of the server where you're going. So in this case, I would put something like server name / path to files. Now, path to files would be replaced by whatever the folder names are that you're browsing down to. Then I would need to put in my username, whatever it is, and the password would be something like whatever it is. Okay, so you just put that in. When you do that, it adds the network share to this list of files. And notice that this is simply the list of files that this machine can talk to. So I would simply browse down to the files that I wanted to and select them. Okay, select the files that I wanted for backup. I've now made it so that my machine not only can back up files that are locally hosted on this machine, but I can make it so that it can connect to any other machine that is sharing via a Microsoft Share files out to the system. Now, I do need to point out a couple of things. There are some limitations with the way that this network share stuff works. Specifically, when attaching to a non-Microsoft server that is sharing data as a Microsoft server using what's called server message block or SMB, or sometimes called Samba, specifically certain Linux servers, sometimes the interaction doesn't work properly because they don't implement the entirety of the server message block protocol stack, not the way that Microsoft does. And as a result, sometimes you will see Linux shares having difficulty being backed up by Mozy because we're having troubles connecting to them. It is, again, a limitation of the way that those implementations of the server message block protocol work. what that really means, sometimes Linux shares don't work inside of MozyPro simply because of the way that those Linux servers implement the protocol for sharing files.